During his first shift, a young doctor realizes that the truth written in the file of the young woman in a coma, that she is beyond recovery, may be wrong. At a moment when no one believes him, the new tests he secretly orders reveal a fatal mistake that could save a life. Stay with us until the end, and let's uncover this secret together. Ethan gripped the strap of his backpack tightly as he crossed the reception area of the General Hospital of Oaxaca. It was his first day as a doctor, his first job. His heart was beating so fast that it felt like it was going to jump out of his throat. His white coat still smelled new. He had dreamed so much about this moment, but everything felt too cold. No one smiled. No one asked his name. A man with a tired look stretched out his arm and handed him a clipboard with papers, as if he were handing him anything. "Are you the new guy? I didn't see your photo. Take this. You're going to the terminal area today," he said without looking him in the eye. Ethan didn't have time to ask questions. He just clutched the tray tightly, feeling its weight, as if it were more than just paper. He walked to the elevator, but it was out of order. He climbed the stairs slowly. Each step was a challenge. Each step seemed higher than the last. When he pushed open the door on the third floor, he noticed a different smell. It wasn't strong, but it was a dry smell, like medicine and clothes that had been stored away for a long time. The light in the hallway was dim. The walls were an old color. Time passed slowly there, or perhaps it no longer passed at all. The terminal area seemed forgotten. The sounds there were different. A distant beeping, a whisper, a tired sigh. Ethan walked slowly, looking at the open rooms. He saw tired faces, crying family members, closed eyes, motionless bodies. Some patients' skin was so thin it looked like paper. Others were full of tubes with machines doing what their bodies could no longer do. He swallowed. He had never been so close to death like this. Ethan took a few more steps into the terminal area. He looked around, trying to figure out what to do. He noticed that almost all the faces in the beds were of elderly people. Some had very thin skin, marked by the years. There was a man with his eyes open, still, as if he had been waiting for someone for many years. In another corner, a woman slept with a rag doll hugged to her chest. It was as if each room held a secret, a story that was left unfinished. Ethan took a deep breath. He felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to do more. He wanted to understand. But it was his first day. No one explained anything to him. They just told him to be there. When he entered one of the last rooms, his eyes went straight to a corner lit by sunlight. The window was open. The curtain moved slowly in the gentle breeze. And there, on that distant bed, he saw something that made him stop walking. A young woman. She didn't look to be more than 30 years old. She had curly brown hair spread out on the pillow. Her face was calm, almost serene, as if she were just asleep. But her body didn't move. Her eyes were closed. Her hands were on the sheet, and her chest rose only because of the machine connected to her side. Ethan felt a chill down his spine. She didn't belong there. It didn't seem like she should be there. He approached slowly. The sound of the machine beside her was the only sign that time was still passing. He picked up the chart hanging at the foot of the bed. His fingers trembled slightly as he read aloud. Julieta Valenzuela, 27 years old, brain tumor, no surgery, advanced stage, no chance of improvement. He slowly lowered the paper and looked at her again. He observed her skin, her delicate features, her breathing so light that it was almost imperceptible. He thought, with a heavy heart, she doesn't look like she's dying. Then he heard a noise, a scream, people running. A woman in critical condition had just died. In the following weeks, Ethan did everything he was told. He had no room to express his opinion. He was the new guy. He did what was on the sheet. He administered morphine at the appointed times, changed the IV, wrote down her vital signs, and carefully read the old test results, even though everyone around him was already sure that there was nothing more to be done. Julieta was treated as a closed case, an advanced tumor with no hope, they said. The medications were too strong. Sometimes Ethan looked at the bottles and thought, is this still caring, or is it giving up? No one talked about hope, only time. How much time was left? How long would it take? How much longer would they keep the machines running? Still, something bothered Ethan. He couldn't really walk away from her. In the other rooms, the end had already come, but with Julieta, it was different. Something didn't fit with death. Her face showed no pain. She was calm. Her eyes were closed, but they seemed alive, as if inside she was still there, feeling everything. Sometimes Ethan would sit by the bed without saying anything, just staying there, watching, listening to the machine breathe for her, and the silence between them was full of questions. How did she end up here? He wondered. Does anyone talk to her? She listens. What moved him most was that her face didn't change, but it didn't fade away either. It was as if Julieta was waiting for something, as if she could open her eyes at any moment. That calmness was not that of someone who is leaving. It was that of someone who is on pause. Ethan began to notice every detail, the way her fingers sometimes almost moved, a muscle in her face that trembled for seconds and then stopped. Small things that no one else seemed to see, but to him, they mattered. He wrote them down in a hidden notebook he carried in his pocket. He didn't tell anyone, he just wrote. Deep down, he felt that something was wrong, very wrong, but he didn't know how to prove it. The only thing he knew for sure was that Julieta was never out of his mind, not even for a minute. She appeared in his dreams, in the memory of his sister who was in the village, in the eyes of the people he wanted to save, but couldn't. In that part of the hospital where time seemed to stand still, Julieta was the only sign that maybe, just maybe, life was still there, quietly waiting for someone to believe. In the third week, Ethan woke up from a quick nap in one of the hospital chairs. His head was resting against the window pane and the sun was shining softly on his face. He felt a strange pressure in his chest, a kind of nostalgia that could not be explained in words alone. He reached into his pants pocket and pulled out an old, slightly crumpled photo with worn edges. It was Mariana, his younger sister, 12 years old, with a toothless smile and her hair tied back with a blue ribbon. She was back in the village with their mother. He hadn't seen either of them in months. Since graduation, he hadn't had the courage or the time to go back. He always said, "I'll call next week, I'll visit next month." But the days passed, and he only grew further away. He looked at the photo for a while, sighed, put it back in his pocket, and ran his hand over his face. Then he got up, stretched his back, and walked to Julieta's room. He stood at the door and stared. She was the same, curly hair spread out on the pillow, hands still, eyes closed. But her face that day, seemed very familiar to him. Ethan went in and sat down next to her. He was silent for a few minutes, then whispered, as if talking to someone who was asleep. "Today, you look so much like my sister." His eyes filled with tears. It wasn't just the hair, it was that calmness, the youthfulness, that feeling that she still had her whole life ahead of her. Mariana also had many dreams. She wanted to be a teacher. She talked non-stop. She sent messages with stickers and funny little voices to make him laugh. And Julieta didn't say anything. But even though she was quiet, she had something that reminded him of Mariana. A gentle presence, a hidden strength, and that began to weigh on him inside, a mixture of guilt and fear. He thought of his mother, alone with his sister. He thought about how many people like Julieta were being forgotten, left in a corner without a second chance. He placed his hand gently on Julieta's. It was cold, but firm. He closed his eyes and spoke softly. If it were Mariana here, she would do everything, absolutely everything. And with you, it won't be any different. That day, the knot in his chest became a certainty. He couldn't go on pretending that Julieta was just another patient. She wasn't. She reminded him of what he had left behind. She reminded him of who he was before everything became just work, shifts, and exhaustion. And it was there, sitting next to her, his heart tight and his face wet with nostalgia, that Ethan began to change. He didn't know how or when, but something inside him decided. He was going to fight for her, even if no one else believed. The night was hot and heavy, and Ethan tossed and turned in the bed of the small room he rented near the hospital. The fan made an annoying noise, and even so, he couldn't close his eyes. Thoughts came and went, as if someone were knocking on the door of his head non-stop. The image of Julieta, so still, so calm, wouldn't leave his mind. It was as if she were asking for help, silently. He looked at the clock. 3 a.m. There were still hours to go before his shift started, but he couldn't stand lying there waiting for time to pass as if everything were normal. He grabbed his backpack, threw on a shirt, and went out into the empty streets with a heavy heart, walking quickly. The hospital looked different in the early morning, darker, colder, quieter. He entered through the back door like someone who already knew every corner. He climbed slowly, stepping softly until he reached the terminal area. Everything was the same: the dim lights, the sound of the machines, the painful silence. Ethan walked to her room and pushed the door open carefully. There was Julieta, exactly as he had left her, her curls scattered on the pillow, her face peaceful, the machine beside her keeping the same rhythm. He sat down in the chair next to her bed and looked at her as if waiting for an answer. The clock read 3:23 when he whispered, "Why would a tumor put someone in a coma so quickly?" It was the question that had been on his mind since day one. He knew there were cases like that, of course, but Julieta didn't have the typical symptoms. She hadn't lost much weight. Her skin was rosy, her body strong, and the more he read, the stranger the tests seemed. He rested his elbow on his knee, his hand covering his mouth, deep in thought. Something didn't add up. Something didn't make sense, and he couldn't ignore it anymore. You don't look like someone who's leaving," he said in a low voice, looking at that still face. He stayed there for over an hour. The hospital was asleep, but he wrote in the little notebook he carried in his pocket. Beats too fast, healthy body, slightly moist eyes, calm face. Investigate real cause. It was as if a spark had been lit inside him, and in that early morning silence, while everyone was asleep, Ethan understood that he could no longer pretend it was just another case. He had to do something, and he was going to start now, even if no one believed him, even if they said he was crazy. He got up from his chair, took a deep breath, and looked at her one last time before leaving the room. "I'm going to find out what's wrong with you, Julieta, and if I'm right, you'll smile again." Morning came at the hospital. He hadn't slept well, but he felt a different strength inside. He put on his coat as if it were armor and went straight to the study room. He had to act. He could no longer wait for someone else to do for Julieta what he felt he had to do. Without telling anyone, he took a sample of her blood. He did it carefully, as he had been taught in his first semesters at university. He looked at Julieta, who was lying still, as if asking for permission with her eyes, and silently, with steady hands, he did what he knew how to do. "Help me help you," he whispered, as if she could hear him. He picked up the sample and went straight to the lab. The technician who received it looked at him suspiciously. That patient in the terminal area, Ethan just nodded. "I just want to confirm something." He waited for the result, as one waits for an answer from life. Sitting on a metal bench with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, he thought about everything he had felt since he met Julieta. Something inside him told him that she was alive in there, trapped in a body that could still react. He had to prove it, even if it was just for himself. Hours later, the results arrived. Ethan opened the envelope with trembling hands, read line by line, and sat there motionless, not quite understanding. Everything was clean, no infection, no alteration, no signs of inflammation, nothing to suggest that her body was being attacked by something as serious as an advanced brain tumor. All the levels were normal, too normal. He stood silently for a few minutes, his eyes scanning the numbers, a lump in his throat. How was this possible? In the hallway, he ran into two older doctors and tried to explain. "I repeated the blood test for the patient in room 34. It's clean. There's nothing there to explain the coma." One of them chuckled softly and shook his head pityingly. "Ethan, you still have a lot to learn. A brain tumor doesn't show up like that in a blood test. That's serious. Accept it, kid. Sometimes we just accompany them to the end. It's easier." The other one put his hand on his shoulder and said, "I was like you too, full of hope. But not everything has an answer here. Do your job. That's all." Ethan just nodded. He didn't say anything else, but inside, it was as if something had exploded, because at that moment, he knew. It wasn't a question of experience, it was a question of seeing what others didn't want to see. It was not leaving someone alone because everyone else had already given up. He went back to Julieta's room, sat down next to her, and held her hand tightly. "I saw the test results, Julieta. Everything is normal. Something is wrong with all this, and I'm going to find out what it is. You're not alone." That day, he stopped being just a new doctor. He became the only one who still believed that Julieta could come back. The next day, Ethan went straight to the neurology department with the test results in his hand and his heart beating fast. All the way there, he practiced what he was going to say. He wanted to be firm, but respectful. He wanted them to listen to him, to at least consider it. It wasn't about being right. It was about a life. He knocked on the door of Dr. Renata's office, the head of neurology. She was an experienced woman, known for being serious and speaking directly. She didn't like pretty words, but she wasn't unfair either. Ethan took a deep breath before entering. "Doctor, I need to talk to you. It's about the patient in terminal area 34. She didn't even look up from her papers. The girl in a coma. Brain tumor. I already know the case. What's going on?" Ethan handed her the envelope with the blood test results. "I repeated the blood tests on my own. There's nothing, doctor. Nothing. Everything is normal. I don't understand. She's alive. Her body reacts as if it were healthy." She took the paper, looked at it for a few seconds, and then set it aside as if it were just another prescription. "Ethan, the initial tests don't lie. The image of the tumor is there, large and inoperable. We're not going to raise hopes where there are none. That only delays the process. And if there's a mistake, I read the reports. I saw the images, and something seems strange to me." She looked up seriously. "You're still new, Ethan. I understand that need to want to save everyone. We all go through that, but here we deal with reality. The tests are there. Accept it. That young woman is only a matter of time." She paused and then added, almost sadly, with a sad look in her eyes, "What a beautiful pity. So young." Ethan felt as if he had been punched in the chest. He wanted to scream, but he held back. He bit down on the urge to say everything. He knew that if he said anything else, it might seem disrespectful. He looked down, clutched the paper in his hand, and left the office in silence. In the hallway, he paused for a moment and took a deep breath. He looked at the crumpled paper. What was written there was not a lie, but it also did not explain what he saw in Giulietta's closed eyes. It did not explain the life he still felt in her. He returned to his room, stared at her for several minutes, then sat down and said in a broken voice, "They say you just have to wait for the end, but I don't believe that. I haven't seen people die with you. I know that look, but yours is still here." He closed his eyes for a moment, holding back the emotion that was almost escaping him, and added, "I'm not going to accept it, even if I have to do it alone." Ethan spent the rest of the day with his mind in turmoil. He walked the halls as if looking for something, but in reality, what he wanted was to find a way out of all this. Deep down, he felt he was facing a mistake, and that mistake could have cost the life of someone who could still come back. That night, he took advantage of a moment of silence in the hospital and went to the archives. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't want to hear another word. He didn't enter slowly. He turned on the light and began searching through the drawers where they kept the old tests. The folders had dates and crooked labels, some covered in dust. After almost half an hour of searching, he found what he wanted: the first reports and images of Giulietta's case. He sat down at the table with his heart pounding. He opened everything slowly, as if touching a secret. He first grabbed the image of the original CT scan. The supposed tumor was marked there with a blue pen, with arrows and notes. Then he opened the most recent image from last week. He compared the two. At first they looked the same, but something didn't add up. He frowned, squinted, turned back a page, looked again. There was something strange. The shadows in the scan had a shape that repeated itself a lot, as if someone had used the same image more than once, the same cut, the same angle. Even the little spots around them were identical. It was as if the old image had been pasted over the new one. He took a plastic ruler and measured the details, the same sizes, the same distances. He took a deep breath. He felt a chill. "This can't be right," he muttered. He checked again. He looked at the data printed in the corner of the image. Something caught his attention. The exam code was very similar to that of another patient he had seen days before, an 80-year-old woman who had died that same week. He felt a blow to his chest. No, it can't be. He suddenly got up from his chair and looked around as if the world had stopped. His hands were shaking. His face was burning. The images were wrong. He had no doubt. That CT scan wasn't hers. Ethan was sure of it. Giulietta was there because of a mistake. A serious mistake. a mistake that could have caused them to turn off the machines and end the only thing she still had, her life. He pressed the tests to his chest and closed his eyes for a moment. He knew it. He felt it. It was impossible for her to be dying, not like this. That night, Ethan didn't sleep or rest, because now he had what he needed to prove that Giulietta wasn't a lost cause. She was a victim, and he, for some reason he still didn't understand, was the only person willing to see that. Ethan spent the day with the images in his backpack and a weight on his chest. He was sure of what he had seen. It wasn't just a suspicion, it was proof, but no one would believe him. He was just a recent graduate. Worse, if he tried to do what he was thinking without permission, he could even lose his job. Still, he couldn't stop. Every time he saw Giulietta lying there, motionless, his heart ached. She didn't know it, but he was already fighting for her, and now he was going all the way. That same night, he went online from his cell phone and searched for clinics in the area that did CT scans. He found a small one in a distant neighborhood that was open 24 hours a day. He called, he explained quickly, somewhat nervously. On the other end of the line, a receptionist answered, "Without a doctor's order, the exam is expensive, doctor, cash only. But if you bring her in tomorrow, we'll do it without an appointment." Ethan thanked her and hung up. He went to find the doctor who performed tests at the hospital. He told him he wanted to help a patient, but that no one would accept the new tests, which were from private clinics, and that he had to take her there, but without a doctor's order, and that meant involving the family. He told the doctor that he would pay for it himself, that no one should know, and that his only motive was to save a life. The doctor saw no problem in helping to save a life, but charged him for staying after hours and doing the test on the sly. He left the office happy, but worried about the money. He looked at his wrist. The graduation watch still sparkled. It was simple, but very valuable. It was a gift from his mother, the day he graduated. Her name was engraved on the back. "So you never forget where you came from. With love, Mom." He carefully took off the watch and stared at it for a while. Immediately he remembered his mother's hug, the excitement of that day, the pride in her eyes. But he also remembered something she always said: "The good you do is never lost." The next day, before sunrise, Ethan grabbed the watch and went downtown. He found a pawn shop that was just about to open. He walked in with a firm step, took the watch out of his pocket, and placed it on the counter. "How much will you give me for this?" The man examined it, twisted his mouth, adjusted his magnifying glass. 100, 120 at most. "It's good, but it's used. Give it to me. I need it. Now." He left the store with the money clutched in his hand. He returned to the hospital. Outside of his working hours, he lied, saying it was an urgent test requested by another doctor. Minutes later, he met with the doctor, secretly gave him the money, and the doctor told him to wait for him in the dining room, that when he was finished, he would look for him there, that he should not go to the examination area so as not to arouse suspicion. He went up to the empty cafeteria and sat alone at a table. 40 minutes later, the man arrived, sat down at the table, and handed him a brown envelope. He pretended not to notice, got up, and left. Ethan also pretended not to notice, and got up shortly after. Ethan climbed the hospital stairs with the envelope clutched in his hands. His heart was beating so hard it felt like it was going to explode. The world around him remained the same. People walking, nurses talking quietly, stretchers passing by. But inside, everything was upside down. He entered an empty room, locked the door, took the report out of the envelope with trembling hands, and spread the pages on the table. His eyes read the lines, number by number, image by image. He read it once, then again, and a third time, until he stopped. There, in front of him, was what no one expected. There was no tumor, no mass, no shadow. The brain was clean, completely clean. He dropped the papers on the table, put his hands to his head, paced back and forth with his eyes wide open, breathing heavily. He couldn't speak. He couldn't think. The image of Giulietta lying there, motionless for days, thinking she was doomed. And now this. "This can't be," he said softly, repeating it over and over. It was a miracle. It was a mistake. It was something no book could explain. He didn't know. He only knew that Giulietta shouldn't be there, being treated like a body with no future. Without thinking twice, he left the room and went straight to the neurology floor. He walked through the hallways without stopping. He climbed 2 flights of stairs as if he were running to save someone. He knocked hard on Dr. Renata's office door. Once, twice, 3 times. She opened it, startled. "Ethan." He entered without asking permission. "Look at this now." He threw the report on her desk with a firm but trembling voice. His face was red, his eyes full of rage and fear. "I paid for it. I repeated the exam. New CT scan. See for yourself." She grabbed the papers, adjusted her glasses, and began to read slowly. Ethan paced back and forth, breathing deeply. "The tumor is gone, doctor. It disappeared." "Oh, maybe it never existed. She's in a coma." "Yes, but not because of that. What if it was a mistake? What if she's been alive all this time by mistake? Sedated, forgotten. She's young. She has a life. She has a family. This is wrong. Is this serious? Either we made a huge mistake, or a miracle happened." The doctor was silent. For a second, her eyes sought his. The paper trembled in her hand. She didn't say anything right away. And Ethan added, "I only know one thing. If we continue to treat this girl as if she were dead, we are going to kill a living person, and I'm not going to let that happen." She stopped walking, took a deep breath, and in a calmer tone, almost like a plea, said, "Please help me save her before it's too late." The only sounds in the room were the air conditioning and the soft sound of her breathing. But at that moment, a new truth was beginning to emerge, and Giulietta might have a new chance. You see, that same afternoon, the hospital was thrown into turmoil. The news spread through the hallways like a strong wind before a storm. Doctors rushed out of the rooms. Nurses whispered among themselves. Directors were called in urgently. No one knew how to react. Such a serious mistake. No one wanted to believe it. But now it was there, clear, in the hands of a newly graduated doctor who just wanted to understand why a young woman so full of life was being left to die. Dr. Renata gathered the team. They locked themselves in a room with piles of tests, reports, and files. Ethan stood to the side, clutching Giulietta's new CT scan. The atmosphere was tense, heavy. One of the older doctors, his glasses slipping down the bridge of his nose, opened the original test folder and began comparing it to the new one. "Something's wrong here," he muttered. "This here," said another, pointing to the codes in the lower corner. "This number isn't hers. Look at the date. If you put it into the system, another name comes up." They began to check the files one by one, and then, in a silence filled with fear, came the confirmation. The tumor was real, but it wasn't Giulietta's. It belonged to another patient, a woman named Teresa Duarte, 78, who had been admitted on the same day as Giulietta, in the room next door. The tests had been done minutes apart, but the names had been stuck in the wrong folders. Teresa had died the day Ethan arrived at the hospital, and Giulietta was in a coma for reasons still unknown. But it wasn't because of a tumor. It wasn't because of anything irreversible. The whole hospital was in shock. The head nurse put her hands to her head. One of the doctors sat down in a chair and remained silent, staring at the floor. This is unacceptable," someone said. "How did we let this happen?" Ethan, his eyes filled with tears, did not shout, did not complain. He just lowered his head and said in a low voice, "She could have died because of this, and no one would have noticed." They began reviewing documents, changing passwords and protocols, and putting up signs with rules on the walls. But Ethan didn't care about the punishments. He could only think about Giulietta. He left the room, crossed the hallway with firm steps, and went to her room. He stood at the door, took a deep breath, and went in. He walked slowly to the bed. He looked at her with eyes full of emotion. He took her hand and said softly, "I knew it. I felt it. You're here and now. Now everything is going to change." He stood there for a while, just holding her hand, and in that silent touch, full of truth, there was a promise that from that moment on, Giulietta would no longer be treated as someone without hope, because now everyone knew she wasn't dying. She was waiting for someone to believe. Ethan left the meeting with his legs shaking. He felt like the floor was going to give way beneath him. So much had happened in such a short time. The mistake confirmed, the truth discovered, the hospital in shock. But what hurt his heart the most was thinking about everything Giulietta had gone through. Silent, unconscious, in a cold bed, while the world outside went on as if she were already gone. He walked slowly through the hallways. The terminal area was silent as always, but now that silence felt different. It was no longer the silence of the end, but of waiting. It was as if time were holding its breath, hoping along with him. When he entered the room, he stood at the door for a moment. The sun was shining through the window, gently illuminating Giulietta's hair. She was still the same, but now she looked different to him. She was still alive there, waiting for someone to hold her hand. He approached slowly, as if the floor were made of glass, pulled up a chair, sat down beside her, and took her hand in both of his. He squeezed it gently, as if holding something fragile but precious. Ethan's eyes were filled with tears, but he no longer tried to hide it. His chest felt tight, and he had a lump in his throat that almost choked him. He said softly, his voice breaking, "Forgive me," he said, lowering his head and resting his forehead on his hand. "Forgive me for taking so long to understand, for not being able to before, but now I know. Now I'm sure." He lifted his face and looked at her, tears falling freely. "They promised you it was the end, but they were wrong. They almost took you away from us. But I'm here. I stayed. I'm not going to leave you." He paused, took a deep breath, and said with all his heart, "I promise you, I'm going to get you out of here alive, with dignity, with hope." Her hand remained still, but Ethan felt that something in her was listening to him, perhaps not with her ears, but with her soul. And in that promise whispered through tears, there was a truth so deep, so full of love and courage, that the room seemed brighter, warmer. He stayed there with her for a while, just holding her hand, as if holding a life, as if holding a miracle about to awaken. The hospital clock read almost 6 p.m. when the door to the room opened slowly. Ethan, who was still sitting next to Giulietta, holding her hand, looked up calmly. Two people appeared in the doorway, a woman with a tired but tender look on her face, and next to her, a little girl with her hair tied back with a pink ribbon, carrying a colorful backpack. "Excuse us," the woman said in a low voice. "We are Giulietta's family. They called us to come and explained about a mistake in the tests." Ethan stood up immediately, discreetly wiped away his tears, and tried to smile, but his emotions prevented him from hiding everything. "You are her mother and sister." The woman nodded, looked at her daughter in bed, and held back her tears. "My name is Clara, and this is Camila, Giulietta's younger sister." Camila stepped forward, hugging her backpack to her chest. "Are you the doctor who is taking care of my sister?" she asked, her big eyes full of curiosity. Ethan crouched down to her level. "Yes, that's me. My name is Ethan, and let me tell you something. Your sister is very strong and looks a lot like you." Camila smiled a little. So did Clara. The atmosphere in the room changed. It became lighter, as if a pleasant breeze had entered with them. Ethan pulled out 2 chairs and invited them both to sit down. They began to talk. Clara told stories about Giulietta as a child. She said she loved to cook, that from a young age she would invent recipes with whatever was in the refrigerator. Camila laughed as she recalled when her sister tried to make a bean cake and almost blew up the oven. "She's a little crazy, isn't she?" said the girl, smiling. "A little," replied Ethan, laughing too, "but she's the kind of crazy you want to have around." Time flew by. Ethan felt as if he had known this family for years. The mother had a calm way of speaking, like someone who had lived a long life. Camila was sweet, smart, with a special sparkle. The 3 of them, chatting with Giulietta, seemed to form a circle of love around her. Suddenly, Camila opened her backpack and took out a folded piece of paper. It was a song, one that Giulietta sang to her at night when she couldn't sleep. "Can I sing it to her?" she asked, looking determined. Ethan and Clara nodded. Camila began to sing softly, a simple, sweet melody. Her voice trembled at first, but it grew stronger. It was as if she were saying to her sister, "I'm here, come back." And then it happened. Giulietta moved her head slightly, almost imperceptibly, but Ethan saw it, and so did Clara. Camila stopped singing and stood there with her mouth open, unable to believe it. "She moved, Mom," she said, pulling her mother's arm. Clara stood up suddenly. Ethan moved closer. Giulietta's eyes were still closed, but now there were tears running down her cheeks. "She's crying," Ethan said, his voice breaking. Camilla put her hand on her sister's chest and whispered, "I knew you were listening to me." Silence returned to the room, but it was no longer a sad silence. It was one of hope. At first, Ethan felt his heart beating fast, and at that moment, surrounded by love, Giulietta gave the first sign that she was coming back. The days that followed were unlike anything that room had ever experienced. There was no longer the silence of the end. Ethan and Camilla began to create a routine just for them, a new way of talking to Giulietta, as if she were just resting, not trapped in a coma. Every morning, Camilla arrived with her backpack and a pile of folded papers. They were lyrics to songs Giulietta liked, lyrics she wrote herself, made-up stories, and news she read on her mom's cell phone. Ethan was always there with coffee in hand and eyes full of hope. "There's news today, Giulietta," he would say. "A woman won the lottery and forgot her ticket in the fridge. Can you imagine that?" Camilla would laugh, sit down next to the bed, and start singing. Sometimes she was out of tune, sometimes she cried in the middle of the song, but she didn't stop. It was as if her voice carried the love of the whole family to Giulietta's ear. "If you listen carefully, sis, you'll remember our song, the one we made up in the yard. Do you remember?" She sang and held her sister's hand gently. And Ethan told stories from the hospital, about how confused he was the first few days, about how he almost fainted when he gave his first injection. "Camilla laughed so hard at me that she almost woke up the whole floor," he said, laughing too. Giulietta's eyes were still closed, but she was different. Her body didn't look so still anymore. Her skin was pinker. And then, on a hot Thursday afternoon, it happened. Camilla was finishing a song, and Ethan was arranging the pillows when he noticed something small. Giulietta's eyes, although closed, seemed to move as if she were dreaming, as if part of her wanted to wake up. "Camilla, look at her eyes," whispered Ethan, his heart beating fast. The girl came closer and opened her eyes wide. "She's moving! She's moving!" And as if that gave Giulietta's body courage, the fingers of her right hand moved very slowly, one, then another, as if trying to reach for something. Ethan fell into the chair, unable to say a word. He covered his mouth with his hands, his eyes filled with tears. It was real. She was coming back slowly, but she was there. "Giulietta, you're there, aren't you?" he whispered, his voice breaking. I knew you would hear." Camilla cried and laughed at the same time. "We're not going to stop, okay? We're going to sing until you open those eyes and scold us for singing badly." And there, in that room full of love, hope, and music, Giulietta began to return. Every invisible blink, every little movement was a response, a sign. And Ethan, who had fought against everything and everyone, now saw with his own eyes that this life still had so much to live for. That night, after Camilla and her mom left, Ethan stayed a little longer, sitting next to Giulietta. The room was silent, with only the soft sound of the machines and the wind moving the curtain. The light from the hallway came in through the crack in the door and made everything feel calmer. He looked at her and couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. She blinked, moved her fingers, responded. No matter how small, it was a clear sign that Giulietta was still there, alive and fighting. Ethan tried to stay strong, but his heart was too heavy. He slowly got up from the chair, pressed his lips together, and left the room. He walked through the empty hallways until he found the bathroom at the end, the one that almost no one used. He went in, closed the door, and leaned against the cold wall. The tears came rushing out. He slid to the floor, sat down close to the door, hugged his knees, and cried. He cried for everything he had endured for weeks, for the anguish of not being heard, for not knowing if he was right, for the courage he had to muster, even though everything told him to give up. He cried for Giulietta, for the injustice she had suffered, and above all, for the hope that was now returning. In a low, almost soundless voice, he said to himself, "You're going to live. You have to live." The image of her blinking came back to his mind like a movie. The tear that fell from her eyes, the movement of her fingers, That small reaction that for anyone else would have been just a reflex, but for him meant everything. It was life. He ran his hands over his face, tried to take a deep breath, but it was difficult because along with the joy came fear. What if it all stopped there? What if she didn't get past that? But Ethan didn't let those thoughts grow. He had to believe. She needed him whole, with faith, with courage. "I promised," he murmured, "and I don't break promises." He stayed there a few more minutes, then got up, washed his face, looked at himself in the mirror with his eyes still red, and left. He returned to her room. He sat in the same chair as always, took her hand again, and said in a firm voice, as if making a promise, "I'm here, and I'm not leaving until you wake up and tell me to shut up. You're going to live, Julieta. I believe in you more than ever." The days passed, and Ethan no longer had a schedule or routine. The hospital became his home, the terminal area his world. He didn't leave there for anything, only going to the chair in the hallway when his body couldn't take it anymore. He slept on his side, curled up, his head hanging forward, and even so, with any little noise coming from the room, he would wake up immediately, ready to run to Julieta. During the day, her mother and little Camila stayed in the room, bringing flowers, playing new music, hanging pictures on the wall, reading bits of books, and telling neighborhood gossip, as if Julieta could hear everything. "Sister, the neighbor fell off her bike again," Camila said with a giggle. "I know you're there," trying not to laugh. Her mother, her eyes always filled with tears, sat next to her, stroked her hair, and spoke softly to her. "When you come back, we'll eat that cake you make, the cinnamon one with cajeta. Do you remember?" Ethan watched everything from outside. Sometimes he smiled, sometimes he cried silently, but he didn't leave for anything. When night came and the visitors left, he would go into the room, fix the pillow, check the equipment, and sit next to her. He talked, told her what had happened during the day, told silly jokes, sometimes read aloud, other times just sat in silence, holding her hand, as if he didn't want to let loneliness come near. Each new day, Ethan was someone different. The nervous guy from the first shift now walked with confidence. He spoke calmly. He had a different sparkle in his eyes, a sparkle that came from faith, from the certainty that was growing in his heart. Julieta was coming back, and he was going to be there to welcome her. Even his co-workers noticed. The night shift nurse commented one night, "You've changed, Ethan. You look stronger." And he replied, looking down the dark hallway, "It's not strength, it's her. She gives me that. Every time she breathes, it's like she's pushing me forward." Julieta was still fighting. Every little sign was a victory. And Ethan, even though he was tired, even though he didn't rest, remained there, steadfast, like the guardian of a precious castle. Because for him, caring for her was no longer just an obligation. It was love. It was a commitment to the life that still remained there, even if it was silent. It was a quiet dawn. Camilla and her mother had left a few hours ago. The moonlight shone faintly through the window, illuminating the room a little. The whole hospital was asleep. The corridors were empty, and only the sound of the machines broke the silence. Ethan was sitting outside, dozing in his usual chair. He had a coat folded over his legs and his head leaning against the wall. Suddenly, something changed. In the room, Julieta's fingers moved again, but this time it wasn't just that. Her eyelids trembled violently. Her heavy eyes began to open slowly. Her breathing changed. It became faster. Her chest rose and fell at a different rhythm. She looked around with a lost, confused look. Everything felt strange. The light, the sounds, her own body. She tried to move, but her arm barely responded. Her eyes darted from side to side until they settled on the half-open door, and then she saw him. Ethan was there, asleep, his face tired, his beard grown out, his hands crossed over his legs. And somehow, even though she didn't remember who he was, something inside her felt that she knew this man. "Who are you?" she whispered in a weak, hoarse voice, as if she were still searching for her way back. Ethan woke up with a start, as if he had heard a call. He opened his eyes, took a deep breath, unable to believe what he was seeing. She was awake, her eyes open, looking directly at him. For a moment, time stood still. They looked at each other as if they had already seen each other in their dreams. He walked to the edge of the bed, his face lit up with a gentle smile. Excited. "I'm Ethan, the doctor who didn't leave you alone, Giulietta." Her eyes filled with tears. A different sparkle appeared, even though she was afraid and felt weak. She tried to say something, but her voice wouldn't come out. Ethan slowly took her hand, as he always did, and ran his thumb over her fingers. "It's okay. You're back. You're here with me." He was so emotional that he could hardly speak. His eyes were filled with tears. His chest felt tight, as if a great weight had been lifted from him. Giulietta closed her eyes again, but this time it was from exhaustion. She was no longer in a coma. She was resting. For the first time, a real rest. Ethan rested his forehead against hers, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Thank you for coming back. Thank you for holding on." And there, in that silent dawn, two hearts truly found each other. After so much struggle, so much pain, so many days of uncertainty, Giulietta had returned, and Ethan finally felt that it had all been worth it. The days that followed Giulietta's awakening were filled with excitement, beautiful silences, and small victories. Her recovery was slow, as if every part of her body had to slowly remember how to live again. But she was there, alive, with her eyes open. Although still tired, with a weak voice, she was present and smiling. The smile slowly returned each new day. At first, she could only move her head and murmur a few words. Her mouth still felt closed, and her body felt twice as heavy. But Ethan was always close by. He brought her water with a straw, combed her hair carefully, and read her funny things just to see the corner of her mouth move. "You smiled. I saw it," he said cheerfully. She would shake her head and pretend not, but her eyes gave her away. Camilla also never left her side. She would arrive every morning with some new nonsense, a song, a joke, or one of those made-up stories that she swore were true. "You know, sis, while you were sleeping, Dr. Ethan stayed here like a little puppy, sitting at the door, completely in love. I saw it all." "Hey," Giulietta tried to laugh, but only a sigh came out, and her eyes filled with tears. And Camilla continued, "I think he likes you, and you like him too, right? Of course you do. He's really handsome and really cool." Giulietta rolled her eyes slowly, but her answer came with a shy smile that made everything more beautiful. Clara, her mother, was quieter. She sat on the couch, looking at her daughter with a love that was too big for her chest. Sometimes she cried silently. Sometimes she took Ethan's hand, as if to thank him, without having to say anything. She knew that without him, the story would have been very different. Over time, Giulietta regained her speech, little by little, word by word, until one day she called him by his full name, still a little confused, but with an affection that filled the whole room. "Ethan, you really stayed." He stopped what he was doing, looked at her, and replied with a calm smile. "I stayed from the first day, and I'll only leave if you ask me to." Giulietta looked at him emotionally and nodded affectionately. Little by little, she began to understand everything. The change in tests, the misdiagnosis, the time she spent asleep while the world thought she was leaving. And more than that, she understood that even though she was in a coma, she was never alone. She found out about the watch he sold, the test he took in secret, the sleepless nights, her sister's songs, the little notes they left on the table, everything. "Why did you do all that?" she asked one afternoon in a quiet voice. Ethan looked at her and answered sincerely, "Because I saw you, and I knew you couldn't leave." And Giulietta, her eyes filled with tears, just smiled, because there was more strength in that smile than in 1,000 words. And with each new day, even with therapy, medicine, and exhaustion, she became more herself. And Ethan, who had already saved her life, now discovered that perhaps it was she who was saving his heart. It was on a quiet morning with the sun slowly streaming through the window when Giulietta asked, "Were you alone in the room?" Camilla had gone to get some juice and her mother was resting on a bench outside. Ethan was sitting next to her as usual, reading aloud a newspaper article about old Mexican recipes, just to distract her. Giulietta, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, was pensive, her face calm, but her gaze full of unspoken thoughts. She waited for him to finish reading, and then, in a tone almost like a whisper, asked. I was in a coma because I wasn't going to die. Ethan stopped reading, carefully put down the newspaper, looked at her calmly, trying to choose his words. But before he could say anything, he felt a lump in his throat. He swallowed, remained silent for a few seconds, breathing deeply, as if that moment were more difficult than any surgery or shift at the hospital. He looked her straight in the eyes, and with a firm but emotional voice replied, When I arrived, everyone thought that yes, you weren't going to come back, that it was a matter of days. But I saw you, and there was something there. I don't know if it was God, but something told me. She's not gone yet. He paused, moved a little closer, took her hand gently, and added, I don't think you were just asleep. That's beautiful. Giulietta blinked slowly, as if trying to hold back tears. She smiled a little, moved, and replied almost without strength, but I listened. Sometimes I listened to Camilla, to you, to the music. Ethan smiled too. His voice came out softer. So it was true. I felt it. I felt that you were listening, that you just needed more time. She squeezed his hand gently. Thank you for not leaving. Ethan moved even closer, looked into her eyes as if caring for something very precious, and said, I never left, Giulietta, not even for a second. And they stood there, in silence. A beautiful silence, full of truth, full of life. Outside, Camilla appeared in the glass door with a glass of juice in her hand and a smile on her face. She saw the two of them together and walked back slowly, as if she understood that at that moment, the most important thing was not medicine or food or time, but that encounter, that love that was born in the midst of the impossible. With each passing day, Giulietta talked more, smiled more, and Ethan's presence was already part of her life as if he had always been there. The affection between the two was no longer hidden or disguised. It was clear. It was in the long looks, in the sweet words, in the silences that said more than any conversation. One afternoon, Camilla came into the room with an old box in her hands. She was very excited. Doctor, look what I found in the trunk in Giulietta's room, she said cheerfully. Things from when she was in college. Inside the box were books, notebooks full of notes, papers with food stains, and even photos of her wearing a colorful apron, holding a wooden spoon as if it were a trophy. Ethan picked up one of the notebooks and leafed through it carefully. His eyes sparkled. On each page was a different recipe, written in round handwriting, sometimes half crossed out, with funny comments next to it. Don't use so much salt, bitter memory from last week, he read aloud, and Giulietta laughed softly from the bed. She almost ruined the teacher's dessert that day. It looked like Dead Sea soup. Ethan laughed too, and looked at her tenderly. Why didn't you ever tell me you were a chef? Because you never asked me, she replied, shrugging her shoulders. That same day after work, he went to the bookstore and bought 2 Mexican cookbooks with large photos and traditional recipes. The next day, he came into the room with the 2 books as if he were bringing a very special gift. I chose these because they have mole poblano. I want you to teach me how to make it, he said with a smile. Giulietta looked at him with a sparkle in her eyes. She ran her hand over the covers as if she had found a little piece of her soul. I used to make mole with my grandmother. She said the secret was to cook calmly and with your heart. Then I think I'm in trouble, Ethan joked. Calmness isn't my thing, but my heart is here. She laughed and shook her head. Then you're halfway there. When they weren't singing or doing therapy, the two of them read recipes together. Ethan wrote everything down in a notebook, got the names of the ingredients wrong, and Giulietta corrected him with patience and good humor. Epazote. Ethan, not spaghetti. It looks similar. No, not at all, she replied, laughing so hard she coughed. And amid laughter, books, and memories, the connection between them grew like a well-tended plant, strong, alive, and full of color. Giulietta told stories of her childhood, of Christmases at her grandmother's house, of the cakes she burned at first, and of the smells she smelled every time her mother made rice pudding with cinnamon. Ethan listened to everything as if he were watching a beautiful movie, because for him, hearing Giulietta tell those stories was the clearest sign that she was alive, that she was coming back, and that perhaps love was slowly but surely blossoming there, like a well-made dish, simple, soulful, and impossible to forget. One afternoon, As the sun beat down on the bedroom window, Ethan and Julieta were once again immersed in recipe books. Her bed was covered with sheets of paper and notes, and Ethan, frowning, was trying to understand a tamale recipe that seemed more difficult than performing surgery. "It can't be," he muttered, looking at the book. "How do you roll this up in the corn husk without it falling apart?" Julieta, her voice still weak but full of humor, laughed softly. "With patience, doctor, and with soft hands. Not heavy ones like yours." He dropped the paper, raised his hands, and feigned despair. "Well, that's it. I'd better stick to being a doctor, because I'm no good as a chef." She laughed again. A beautiful, shy laugh, but so full of life that Ethan ended up laughing with her. Unable to help himself, he was really laughing, as he hadn't done in months. He laughed until his face hurt, until his chest felt warm. Julieta looked at him fondly and, her voice still hoarse, said, "You laugh like a child." He stopped, pulled the chair closer to the bed, and replied with a laugh, "I feel like a child with you. Everything here feels new. Even making mistakes is fun." She took a deep breath, as if enjoying the moment, and then said something that left Ethan speechless. "You're like my brother, only more stubborn." Ethan smiled from ear to ear. He put his hand to his chest, pretending to be offended. "More stubborn. Me of all people who am pure, calm." Julieta closed her eyes, still smiling, and shook her head slowly. "You stayed by my side when no one else believed in me. Only someone very stubborn would do that." He lowered his head for a moment, touched in a way he couldn't explain. Then he looked up and said, "If that's what being stubborn is, then I want to be stubborn forever." She stretched out her weak hand and with effort gently touched his hand. It was a small gesture, but so full of meaning that Ethan felt his eyes fill with tears. They stayed like that for a few minutes, unhurried, with no need to say more. Two hearts marked by different pains, but now united by something much greater than lost time, hope, affection, and the beginning of a love that was born quietly, but already filled the room with a light that no one could extinguish. Time passed, and each small advance Julieta made was a silent celebration between her, Ethan, Camila, and her mother. Her face already had more color. Her strength was slowly returning, like someone learning to live again after a very long sleep. Now Julieta could sit up with help, move her arms better, and even take a few small steps around the room with her walker. One afternoon when the hospital was especially quiet, Ethan entered the room carrying 2 small roses in a plastic cup. He placed them on the table next to the bed, with a slightly nervous smile. "Flowers for you, chef." Julieta smiled shyly and adjusted the blanket over her legs. "Thank you, stubborn doctor." He laughed, pulled up a chair, and began to tell her about the new ideas he had for her physical therapy. But before he finished, she interrupted him, her voice still soft but full of enthusiasm. "Ethan, will you help me walk again?" He stopped talking immediately. His heart beat fast. He looked at her with all the tenderness in the world. Julieta wasn't saying this as a simple favor. She was saying it like someone crying out for freedom, like someone who wants to take back her life, even if she doesn't quite know how. Ethan took a deep breath, leaned forward, looked her straight in the eyes, and responded with a smile that was half joke and half emotion. "Only if you promise me one thing." Julieta raised her eyebrows curiously. "When you cook again, you have to teach me how to make mole poblano, but it has to be done right, you see? Because otherwise I'll keep thinking that spaghetti is a condiment." She let out a real laugh, the kind that makes you close your eyes. "Deal, but I'm warning you. Mole poblano requires patience." "Then it's perfect," he replied, winking at her. "I learned patience from you." Her smile grew wider, more hopeful. She reached out her hand with all her strength, and Ethan took it as if he were accepting a very important promise. There, in that small room, smelling of alcohol and medicine, a true promise was born. Not a hospital promise full of difficult words, but a promise of life, of companionship, of love. Julieta knew it wouldn't be easy, that every step would be a hard-won victory. But with Ethan there, with that smile that seemed to carry the world, she felt she could achieve anything. And Ethan knew that her request was much more than just walking again. It was the beginning of a new journey, and he was going to be there every step of the way until he saw her dancing in the kitchen, laughing and full of life. as she always should have been. The big day arrived. After months of machines, physical therapy, tears, and hidden smiles, Giulietta was ready to go home. She wasn't completely recovered. She still had trouble walking on her own. Her arms didn't always do what she wanted them to, but her gaze was one of victory. The whole hospital felt different that day. The nurses stood in the hallway to say hello. Some doctors smiled from afar. Everyone knew the story. They all knew the battle that this young woman and that stubborn doctor had fought together. Ethan walked beside the wheelchair, holding the backrest with one hand and a small bouquet of daisies in the other. "So you can take a little piece of this place with you," he said, handing the flowers to Giulietta. She took them with difficulty, but with a smile so big it seemed to light up the entire hallway. Camilla came skipping along behind, carrying a bag full of books, notebooks, and even a teddy bear. "Sister, now you're going to bake cakes again, right? I want carrot cake every day." Giulietta laughed a little tiredly but happily, and replied, "First I have to relearn how to crack eggs without breaking the shell, too." They left the hospital under the afternoon sun, which seemed more beautiful just because she was leaving. At home, the adjustment was slow. The sofa became a makeshift bed. They moved chairs and rolled up rugs. Everything to make it easier for her to take her first steps. Ethan helped with everything. He guided the family, taught simple exercises, took care of every detail. But the best part came later. Every day, without fail, Ethan knocked on her door, always with flowers in his hand, or a piece of cake from the bakery, or a new book for them to laugh over together. Sometimes he arrived tired after long shifts, but always with that smile that Giulietta already recognized from afar. Camilla, with her quick wit, soon gave him a nickname. "Cute doctor," she would shout from the window when she saw him arrive. "Come on, sister, your doctor is here." Giulietta would laugh and pretend to be angry. "Camilla is going to think it's an old man's nickname." Ethan laughed too. He would scratch the back of his neck, a little embarrassed, but he loved being called that. Deep down, that name said it all. He wasn't the cold doctor we see in the movies. He was the doctor who stayed, who believed, who became a friend, who became family. With each visit, Ethan and Giulietta grew closer. He brought news from the hospital, funny stories about patients, new songs for Camilla, and he always found a way to remind Giulietta that she was stronger than she thought. And so, amid simple flowers, silly laughter, and loving glances, life returned to that house. A different life, slower, perhaps more careful, but with much more love. After many months of patience, tears, physical therapy, and small victories, the day Giulietta had dreamed of finally arrived. It wasn't perfect. She still needed help walking long distances. Her arms got tired quickly, but her soul was whole again. One Sunday afternoon, the sun streamed into the simple kitchen of the house with a golden light. Ethan arrived as usual, carrying a shopping bag and a smile on his face. "Today, the chef is back in the kitchen," he said, winking at Camilla, who was already laughing in the corner. Giulietta, sitting on a chair near the counter, adjusted her apron on her lap and smiled eagerly. "Only if you promise to follow my orders. No improvising, doctor. I'm very good at following orders," Ethan replied, putting on a good boy face. "Yeah, right," Camilla joked. They started with the simple ingredients: rice, chicken, onions, tomatoes. Giulietta, with an attentive gaze, gave orders in a firm but loving voice. "Chop the onion very finely, Ethan. That way no one will cry." He grabbed the knife, somewhat clumsily, and began to chop, but soon he started crying, coughing, and making faces. Finally, "Yes, I'll try, but not crying is too much to ask." Giulietta laughed that free laugh he had been dreaming of hearing for so long. "Now brown the rice. Don't let it burn, eh?" she said seriously, as if she were giving him the most important mission in the world. Ethan obeyed, threw the rice into the pot, stirred it a little, and went to tell Camilla a silly joke. When he looked back at the pot, it was too late. The smell of burning rose quickly. Camilla covered her nose, laughing, and Giulietta, who tried to hold it in, ended up bursting out laughing. Ethan said between laughs, tears falling from his eyes, "You'd make a terrible chef." He pretended to be offended, pounding his chest. "Hey, I just wanted to give it a special touch. A roasted flavor. That tastes more like a campfire barbecue," Camila added, laughing too. Giulietta was laughing so hard she had to wipe her eyes with the sleeve of her blouse. And at that moment, there in that kitchen full of smoke and love, she felt more alive than ever. Ethan approached, knelt beside her chair, and spoke with a loving smile. "Laugh all you want, chef, because I'd rather you laugh at me than go a minute without seeing that smile." She looked at him with eyes shining with emotion and replied, "If you're willing to burn the rice just to see me happy, then you deserve to be my official assistant." And between burnt pots, sincere laughter, and looks that said more than any words could, Ethan and Giulietta continued to build, brick by brick, the most beautiful story anyone could live, that of two hearts that found each other at the most unexpected moment and decided never to part again. The afternoon was quiet. Golden light streamed through the open windows, bringing a gentle breeze that moved the curtains. In the small, simple living room, the silence was broken only by the quiet breathing of Camila, who was sleeping curled up on the couch, hugging a pillow. The kitchen still smelled of burnt rice and stifled laughter. Giulietta was sitting in the rocking chair near the window, her hair tied back haphazardly, a blanket over her legs. Ethan was next to her, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, staring ahead without saying a word. It was a beautiful silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Suddenly, Giulietta reached out her hand. Ethan looked at her in surprise, but soon took it tenderly, as if holding something fragile and precious. Her hand was warmer, stronger than he remembered from the early days. He squeezed it gently, and then, in a low voice, almost a whisper, she asked, "I don't understand why you stayed, even though everyone else left." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. The question hung in the air, heavy and yet so full of tenderness that it hurt in his chest. He took a deep breath, turned to her, and spoke in a calm voice that came from within. "Because from the first day, something in you told me it wasn't the end." He spoke slowly, each word filled with everything he had experienced, everything he had felt, everything he couldn't explain to anyone during those months. He didn't know what it was. He didn't know if it was faith, if it was hope. He continued, his voice slightly broken. He only knew that when he saw her, even though he couldn't hear her voice, even though she was lying there motionless, something inside him screamed that she still had a story to live. Giulietta closed her eyes, letting more tears fall, and Ethan gently ran his thumb over the back of her hand, as if to comfort her, as if to give thanks. "I couldn't leave," he said. "Not after feeling that. Not after seeing your eyes. Even though they were closed, they spoke to me." She tried to smile through her tears, and slowly opened her eyes, looking at him as if she could see the whole life she still had ahead of her. A life that had almost been lost, but was now there, beating, warm, strong. "You saved me," she said with a trembling voice. Ethan shook his head with a humble, tender smile. "You were the one who was saved, Giulietta. I just stayed to remind you of that." They remained silent, just feeling the warmth of being there together. The sound of the wind in the leaves outside seemed like music. Camila was still asleep on the couch, hugging her pillow, as if unknowingly protecting that moment. And in that shared gaze and those silent promises, Giulietta and Ethan understood that some decisions come from the heart before one understands them, and that when one truly believes in someone, even life finds a way to start over. Time passed, and that bond that was born in the silence of the hospital only grew stronger. It was as if everyone knew there was something special between them, but no one said anything. Everyone respected it. Everyone silently wished them well. It was a rainy afternoon, one of those afternoons when the water hits the tin roof and seems to sing a quiet song. Ethan was in the kitchen helping Clara dry the dishes, while Camila played in the covered patio, trying to catch raindrops with her hand. Giulietta, sitting near the window, looked at the wet street with a serene smile. The smell of wet earth filled the house. The sound of the rain made everything more beautiful, as if time had slowed down just so they could live that moment in peace. Ethan finished helping and walked toward her slowly, without rushing. He stood next to the chair and stared out the window too. "I've always liked days like this," he said, breaking the silence. It seems like everyone breathed slower. Giulietta looked at him with eyes shining in a way that needed no words. Me too, she replied softly. For a few seconds, they just looked at each other without saying anything, without needing to explain what was already clear. Ethan knelt in front of her, put his hand on hers, and for a moment everything around them disappeared. The sound of the rain, Camila's laughter, even the clock seemed to have stopped. "You are my sunny day after the storm," he said, his voice full of emotion. Giulietta smiled, a smile that mixed gratitude, affection, and something she had kept in her heart for a long time. And so, slowly, without haste, his heart beating fast, Ethan moved a little closer and pressed his lips to hers. It was a tender kiss, full of care, full of the knowledge that all this had been earned through much pain and struggle, and deserved to be experienced in the most beautiful way possible. Giulietta closed her eyes and let herself be carried away by that quiet kiss, as if in that moment, everything made sense again. The fear, the pain, the lost time, everything was left behind. The sound of the rain continued outside, but inside that house there was only the beautiful silence of two hearts that had finally found each other after so much waiting. When they parted, still with her eyes closed, Giulietta whispered, "I knew you weren't just a doctor. You were my miracle." Ethan rested his forehead on hers, smiling with his eyes closed, and replied, "And you are my life happening again." That rainy afternoon, unseen by anyone, their love was truly born, in the most beautiful way, in the most eternal way. After everything they had been through, Ethan knew that this story had to be told. It wasn't just about medicine. It wasn't just about mistakes or luck. It was about believing when no one else believed. It was about listening to your heart when the studies said otherwise. One quiet night, already lying on the small mattress in the little room he rented, Ethan opened his old laptop, took a deep breath, and began to write. The words came slowly at first, as if each letter carried the weight of everything he had kept in his heart. The title came first, "Mistake That Saved a Life, the Valenzuela Case," and the first sentence, which seemed to have been ready in his head for a long time, appeared on the screen. "She was asleep, and I decided to wait." He stared at that sentence for a few minutes, feeling how it said everything that was important. Then he continued telling the story with simplicity, without using difficult words. It was the story of a young woman diagnosed with a terminal tumor, put in a bed to wait for the end, but who never really stopped fighting. He recounted how in the early days he just followed orders, not having the courage to ask about her, how every soft breath made him feel a doubt and a hope that no one else seemed to have. He wrote about the night when, unable to sleep, he decided to secretly do a blood test, about the fear of being wrong, about the desperation of being just a new doctor facing an entire system, about the day he sold his graduation watch, a gift from his mother, to pay for a new CT scan. He described the moment he saw the clean results, where there was no tumor, and the anger he felt when he realized they were about to bury a life because of a misdiagnosis. He told of the silent fight, of the struggle he fought without shouting, but with courage, just because he believed in what he saw. And above all, he spoke of Giulietta, the woman who resisted in silence, who cried with her eyes closed, who listened to music and stories while she slept, who didn't give up even when the whole world had already given up on her. He wrote about the first movement of her fingers, about the first shy smile, about the first whispered word, and about the first kiss on a rainy afternoon when time seemed to have stopped just for them. He ended the article by saying that medicine needs technique. Yes, but more than anything, it needs humanity. It needs people who look at the patient and see beyond the paperwork, beyond the numbers. Before sending the text to the magazine, he reread it all, and, with tears in his eyes, Ethan smiled. It wasn't just a story about medicine. It was a story about faith, about love, about a second chance. He clicked send and closed the laptop. Then, looking out the window of the small room, Ethan whispered into the silent night, "Thank you, Giulietta, for teaching me to wait, and for teaching me that sometimes the greatest miracles happen when you decide to stay." The story of Giulietta and Ethan did not remain within the walls of that little house full of hope. The article Ethan wrote was read by doctors from many places, and it didn't take long for the hospital where it all happened to understand that it had to change. The mistake with Giulietta was serious, a mistake that almost took a life that still had so much to live for, that now could not be ignored as if nothing had happened. The directors met. Doctors came from other cities. Journalists came. Ethan's name began to be heard throughout the hallways, but not as someone seeking fame or awards. It was different. They spoke of him as an example of something the hospital had forgotten: humanity. They reviewed all protocols. Now, before confirming a serious diagnosis, it was mandatory to repeat all tests in another laboratory without relying solely on previous paperwork. They created a new team just to review sensitive cases. New doctors began to receive more support, more space to talk, to ask questions, to doubt when something didn't seem right. The cold walls of the hospital began to fill with new posters, not with notices of silence or prohibitions, but with simple, powerful phrases. Before giving up on someone, listen to what your heart says. Humanity is the best medicine. Colleagues looked at Ethan differently. Doctors with years of experience, nurses, even directors. Many came to talk to him, not only to congratulate him, but to thank him. "You reminded us of something that should not be forgotten," said one of the area managers, shaking his hand firmly. Ethan, shy, just smiled and said, "I just did what I felt was right." To Giulietta, he was the silent hero. To Camilla, he was the kind doctor who healed more with his heart than with any medicine. And to the entire hospital, Ethan became a symbol of something greater, a living reminder that behind every study, every diagnosis, every sheet, there is a human being who deserves to be seen, heard, and, above all, cared for with love. And in that place, which once seemed like just another building full of rules, the story of Giulietta and Ethan began to be told to every new doctor who arrived, not as a tale of trial and error, but as the greatest lesson medicine can teach, that sometimes saving a life begins simply by staying by their side when everyone else has left. Time was generous to Giulietta. After so much struggle, she didn't just want to survive. She wanted to truly live. She wanted to do what she loved, what she had always dreamed of since she was a child: cooking, teaching, sharing love through food. With the help of Ethan, her mother, and her inseparable friend Camilla, Giulietta went back to school. At first it was difficult. Her body still tired easily, and sometimes her hands shook a little, but her desire was greater than any difficulty. She returned to the classroom with her notebook clutched to her chest and a shy smile on her face. She always sat at the front. She paid attention to every word the teachers said, as if each class were a precious gift. Her classmates soon noticed that Giulietta was not like the others. She had the strength in her eyes of someone who had faced the worst and won. Years later, with her culinary degree in hand, Giulietta wanted to celebrate in a simple but meaningful way. She gathered her family and friends for a lunch she prepared herself. She cooked for hours, laughing, crying, smelling the aroma of the pots, like music that embraced her heart. Ethan, of course, was there, his eyes shining with pride. Camilla was there too, jumping with happiness and taking pictures of everything. But Giulietta wanted more. She knew that many people in the neighborhood needed hope, the same hope that had held her hand in the hospital one day. So with her savings, donations from friends, and a lot of courage, she opened a small community kitchen in the neighborhood square. The place was simple, with light blue walls, wooden tables, a large stove, and shelves full of colorful ingredients, but it was magical. There, Giulietta taught young mothers to cook, teaching them to transform the little they had into delicious, flavorful food that they could sell at the markets and help out at home. Each recipe was taught with patience, as if she were sharing a family secret. Each dish was made with love. Cooking is more than feeding the body, she would tell her students. Cooking also feeds the heart, and those who cook with love are never alone. The mothers left class not only with recipes, but with renewed hope. They took with them the courage of those who learn that they can change their story with their own hands. Giulietta knew this because she herself was living proof of it, and every afternoon, after class, when the kitchen was filled with laughter, the smell of baking cakes, and boiling pots, she would look up at the sky and give thanks in silence. She gave thanks for having lived, for having believed, and for having someone like Ethan, who one day decided not to leave. In that kitchen full of life, Giulietta taught much more than recipes. She taught never to give up, to believe in the impossible, to turn pain into love. And every dish that came out of there carried with it a little piece of the most beautiful story the neighborhood had ever known. A year had passed since the day Giulietta opened the doors of her community kitchen. Many things had changed. Mothers who used to cry because they didn't know how to feed their children now smiled as they sold their food at the market. Young people who had never held a wooden spoon now made cakes that melted in your mouth. And Giulietta was the heart of that place, always wearing her flowery apron, her hair tied back with a colorful scarf, and that same sparkle in her eyes as when it all began. Ethan was still by her side as always, helping when he could. He painted the kitchen's facade, carried sacks of flour, and laughed when he burned the bread. He was part of it all, but there was something he still kept to himself, a feeling that grew with every smile from her, with every hug from Camila, with every day lived in peace. That's when he made up his mind. That afternoon, the sky was clear, the sun was shining. Giulietta had just finished a class with a group of girls and was cleaning the kitchen table. Ethan arrived smiling, hiding something behind his back. "Are you busy, chef?" he asked with that look of a child who is still afraid of making a mistake. "Always, doctor," she replied without turning around, already accustomed to his visits. "Then stop everything, because today is special rice day." Osla stopped, turned slowly, and saw Ethan holding out a plate covered with a cloth. On top was burnt rice, all stuck to the bottom, and next to it was one of those yellow flowers they sell at the market for a few coins. "You didn't do that," she said, already laughing. "Yes, I did. I burnt it just the same, but this time it was on purpose." Giulietta crossed her arms, looking at him suspiciously. "What does that mean?" Ethan took a step forward. He knelt right there, in the middle of the simple kitchen, between pots and flour on the floor. He took a small box out of his pocket, but didn't open it right away. First, he spoke from the heart. "Giulietta, you taught me what it means to live. You showed me that love can blossom even when you least expect it. And I don't just want to be by your side. I want to be your home, your certainty, your calm." He opened the box. A simple, delicate ring sparkled in the afternoon light. "Will you marry me?" Giulietta put her hands to her mouth, laughed, cried, and shook her head as if she still couldn't believe what was happening. Then she dried her eyes and said, "Only if you promise you'll never cook again." He laughed loudly, moved, and replied, "I promise, but I'll keep burning rice just to see that smile of yours." And there, between laughter and tears, she said yes. A what that carried more than love. It carried gratitude, overcoming adversity, and everything they had experienced together. A yes that finally sealed the love that was born where no one believed there was life left. Camila, who was watching hidden behind the door, ran into the kitchen, jumping and shouting. She asked him to marry her. She asked him. She knew it. Now it's official. The tender doctor is going to be my brother-in-law. And everyone laughed. They laughed with their hearts full, because that love built in silence, in waiting, in faith, was now forever. The sound of laughter filled the courtyard of the little house. It was late afternoon, and the sky was painted with warm colors, as if the sun wanted to stay a little longer, just to watch the scene. The wooden table was full of simple dishes, tortillas, rice, beans, a jug of hibiscus tea, and in the center, a back that was still steaming. The sweet smell mingled with the smell of wet earth and garden flowers. Giulietta was sitting on the left with her hair down, a light scarf around her neck, and that smile that always returned when she was surrounded by the people she loved. On the other side was Ethan, his shirt slightly stained with flour, still pretending he knew how to cook, and laughing at himself as he had done from day one. Next to him, Giulietta's mother, Clara, with a peaceful look on her face, broke the bread with steady hands. At the end of the table, Camilla, now a little older, but with eyes still full of mischief, tossed her hair back and talked to everyone at once. It was more than a lunch. It was a portrait of the life he had won, of the faith he had not given up, of the hope that remained, even when all seemed lost. Ethan laughed as he recounted the day he tried to make pancakes, and they all stuck to the pan. Giulietta laughed so hard, she had to lean back in her chair with her hand on her chest. Clara said that if it were up to him, breakfast would be nothing but burnt bread and good humor. And Camilla, her eyes shining with joy, applauded and said, "The best bad cook in the world." Then, in a moment that seemed planned by life itself, Camilla grabbed the cell phone that was recording everything and pointed it at the table. She put her elbow on the wood, smiled at the camera, and spoke in a sweet, firm voice full of emotion. "He saved my sister, but she saved his heart." Everyone was silent for a second. Giulietta looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Giulietta. They didn't need to say anything. What was between them was already greater than any words. Camilla turned off her cell phone, and the silence of that moment was broken by another laugh from the mother, another joke from Ethan, another smile from Giulietta. The camera was still recording the sky, their hands crossing on the table, their eyes full of affection, the gentle wind playing with Camilla's hair. And there, in that simple scene, the miracle lived on. A miracle that did not come from machines or medicine, but from love, from persistence, from the stubborn hope of a doctor who stayed, and a woman who decided to live. The video ends with the sound of laughter, the purest sound of all, because anyone who hears that sound knows that no one was defeated there. There is only life. In this story, what do you think was the bravest decision? Breaking the rules or not giving up hope? Share your thoughts in the comments, and before you go, check out our other stories on the screen. I'm sure you'll like them too.